course, the return episode of Locked On Kings, and the Kings get blown out. Maybe I should have stayed in Disneyland. Ugly, ugly loss. Really the first blowout loss for the Sacramento Kings this season. But some losses are necessary evils, especially the way the Kings have been playing as of late. I'll explain right here on Locked On Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time. Time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all regular season and all offseason. This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. As the world's largest therapy service, BetterHelp has matched 3 million people with professionally licensed and vetted therapists available 100% online. You can learn more and save 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/lockedonnba. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I'm a Sacramento sports reporter and producer. First off, happy Thanksgiving, everybody. Hope you had a wonderful day. Hope you ate your fill, and maybe you are still digging into the leftovers that are piled in your fridge. I know I am. I just got back from a trip to Disneyland with my family. That's why there haven't been Locked On Kings episodes all week to this point. And I'll tell you what, my wife and I are Disney adults. We love Disneyland. Taking a toddler to Disneyland, completely different experience. My 15-month-old had a good time, ran us absolutely ragged. So I'm still recovering a little bit. Unfortunately, I have a bit of a cough coming back. So if I cough into the microphone here during the show, I apologize. And the way the Kings played tonight certainly didn't make me feel better. Now, I do have a little bit of an out. And what I mean by that is I was only somewhat paying attention to this Kings game tonight because for ABC 10, I was out at Hughes Stadium, which is Sac City College's big football stadium, covering the Division I high school football championship game between Folsom and Oak Ridge. Anybody who's out of Sacramento, this means nothing, but those are two juggernaut programs. Folsom ended up winning their second straight Division I championship in a row. So congratulations to them. But I say all this to say, when the Kings were giving up a 36-4 run to the Boston Celtics in the second half, thankfully, I didn't have to sit through and watch that. Now, I have gone back and watched bits and pieces. I paid attention a lot to the first half before the Folsom Oak Ridge game actually started. And there were certainly some negatives in terms of turnovers. The Sacramento Kings did a dreadful job taking care of the basketball. 18 turnovers resulting in 27 points for the Boston Celtics. Yikes. But I will say this team is resilient, and we're going to talk in a little bit about team traits versus team identity, because there's a difference, and some have formed while one still takes, or we need more time to find out what the identity is of the Kings. I'll get into that in a little bit. But like I said in the introduction, sometimes losses like this are necessary evils. Now, let's also put this into perspective a little bit too. The Kings are playing their third game in 4 nights, all on the road, right? It's a tough stretch. The 3 and 4 is something the NBA has really drastically gotten away from in their scheduling. They still exist, and you can see the you can see the impact that they have on teams. So I look at the fact that the Kings ended their 7-game winning streak, right? And now have lost 2 straight. The first loss against the Atlanta Hawks, okay, I can live with a little bit. It's the second night of a back-to-back, and the Kings looked tired in that game. They didn't look themselves. Yeah, I paid attention to it as best as I could while I was in Disneyland. This game, though, the Kings don't have that excuse necessarily. I mean, they're rested in the sense that they had a day off in between, but it's still the third game in 4 nights. And even remove that. And by the way, I'm not making excuses for the Sacramento Kings. I'm putting things into perspective, because the Kings battled tonight against a Boston Celtics team who has the best record in the NBA. A Boston Celtics team who is championship or bust. Like, that team was in the finals last year. They're determined to get back, and they're determined to win it this time. There's a reason why they're playing so damn well. Plus, their combo of Tatum and Brown is ridiculous. I mean, they're both, I think they've scored 30 or more in the same game together, like 6 or something like that times already this season. That's absolutely absurd. Like, the Boston Celtics are the real deal. And I tweeted before this that I was really anxious to see this test for the Kings, because I expected the game to be competitive, which for the most part it was, kind of. I also said in the tweet that I expected the Kings to have a chance to win in the fourth quarter. They really didn't. So they failed, didn't meet my expectations on that part, and that's inexcusable. Like, I know you're tired. I know you're on the end of a road trip. I know you're taking on the best team in basketball right now, record-wise. Giving up a 36-4 run can't happen, especially when a lot of the run happens because you're making mistakes. They had 10 turnovers or something like that in the first quarter. But during this run, they went away from what they were doing well, as far as I could see. They were not attacking the basket. They were settling for outside jump shots, and the shots just weren't falling at the rate that the Kings have gotten used to over this stretch. They shot 25%, 9 of 36 from the three-point line. Like, I know this team sometimes lives or dies by the three, but when the three isn't falling, you have to adjust and adapt and find other ways to score. They were doing that a little bit in the second and third quarters, getting to the basket and that inside-out offense that we've seen be so successful for the Kings. During this stretch, they went away from that. Also, credit to the Boston Celtics. Defensively, they know what they're doing. Like, people forget, as good as the Celtics are offensively, they're a really, really good defensive team. They made adjustments that the Sacramento Kings weren't ready for. And the reality is, you see the Sacramento Kings rattle off 7 straight, which is not a fluke. Like, this is not just, okay, the Kings got hot at one period. I would be shocked, and I would gladly do some sort of forfeit or punishment if the Sacramento Kings are terrible for the remainder of the season and that 7-game win streak was just a flash in the pan. 7-game win streaks don't just happen. That means you're doing something right. That means you're have potential. You're a good team. And I think the Sacramento Kings are a good team. Just like when the Kings rattled off 2 9-game losing streaks in a row a couple seasons ago, we knew that was a clear indication that the team was absolutely dreadful. So it's not a fluke that the Kings won 7 straight. But at the same time, even if the Kings can be classified as a good team or a slightly above average team, which they're 10-8 right now, 2 games over 500, you look at where the Boston Celtics are, and it's a reality check. It's a wake-up call. It's like, okay, that's a championship program. That's a championship program that's had to grind and struggle and fight. Like, Jason Tatum and the Boston Celtics have been in far more playoffs than just last year's playoffs when they made the NBA Finals. And of course, by the way, they lost in the NBA Finals last year. They are extremely battle-tested, not to mention all of the off-court issues involving head coach Ime Udoka that happened before the season started. Like, this team had distractions thrown at them, had injury issues, just lost in the NBA Finals, and they're the best team in the NBA right now. They started the season off that hot. Like, that is a battle-tested team, and you can see the difference. You can see how steep the hill is that the Sacramento Kings still have to climb. They've made a ton of progress. You should still absolutely feel great with the Sacramento Kings being 10-8 right now, considering they started 0-4. The Kings definitely are a better basketball team than they've been in the years past. This is probably going to be the best team that the Kings have had in nearly 2 decades, in 16 seasons, to say the least. And I expect this team to be playing in the postseason of some form. Hopefully it's an actual legitimate playoff series. All of that can be true while also saying that the steep hill between the Kings and the Boston Celtics is going to take a while for Sacramento to climb. A while. And as great as the Kings offense has been, number one offense or close to the number one offense, I think they and the Boston Celtics are like 1 and 2, and they've been flip-flopping a little bit. Like, offensively, the Kings have been one of the most fun teams in the league, one of the best teams in the league, right? And they've been riding this wave. Again, I don't think that's a fluke. But you also look at their defense, and they're in the 20s still. Now, I don't know if it's sustainable for the Kings to stay at 1 or 2 offensively for an entire season. I hope it is. And I hope that 20s will get into the teens by the time we're talking playoffs and by the time we're talking, like, when we get to March and April and May, right? So you expect this team still to grow, and there's clear indications of how this team can grow. A lot of it is experience that is needed. But the steep, steep hill between the Kings and the Boston Celtics is very apparent. And there are other teams up there with the Boston Celtics that the Kings can't claim to be. I mean, maybe you could claim that they're moving in that direction, but if it's a Stairmaster and they're 100 steps in and they're looking up at 800 steps above them, that's where the Boston Celtics are right now. And it's going to be a grind, and it's going to be a sweat to get all the way up there. That being said, part of that grind and part of that sweat, I think, is losing games like this, because it's about how you respond. It's about how you learn lessons, right? And that's what the Kings have done really well, I feel, this season, is Mike Brown has got this team to learn from mistakes, while he himself has also learned from mistakes. So no one wants to get blown out. No one wants to lose 122 to 104. And by the way, the Celtics blew the Kings out by like 40, 50 points last season in Boston, remember? So completely different team. That doesn't really matter, but just reminding you, like, the Kings have been abused by the Celtics before. No one wants to get blown out, but sometimes it's not that you need to be humbled, because I don't think the Kings have been walking around with an unearned swagger. But I think it's a reminder, like I just said, of how far you still have to go. What the difference is between your team, even if you're riding a wave, and a team like the Boston Celtics who have their eyes on a trophy, right? So how do the Kings respond from this? And their upcoming stretch is going to be extremely telling. I'll get into that upcoming stretch at the end of the show and tell you all the teams that they're going to be facing, because I expect this Kings team to learn from this loss. I expect the Kings to look way sharper taking care of the basketball, which I think is a fluke, by the way. I think the Kings turning the ball over this many times, with the way they play, it's bound to happen. I'm surprised it hasn't happened more, but that's not who this team is. The defensive issues, okay, I'm happy to point that out. Defensively, the Kings, of course, need to get better, and that's kind of who they are. But turning the basketball over that much, definitely not who this Sacramento Kings team is. They lead the league in passes. They share the basketball really, really well, typically take care of the basketball really well. Tonight, in that sense, was a combination of Boston's really good defense and I think a fluke on the Kings' part. I think that's fair to say. Now, I want to talk about traits versus identity with the Sacramento Kings, because even if we're 18 games into the season, it's not long enough. Typically, teams say like, or media people say like, oh, I need 20 games to see what this Kings team is. And I think 20 is a good like starting point, but really maybe 30 games into the season, we get past Christmas. Now we can start to see, especially as other teams start to ramp it up and get into their regular season form, we start to see what the identity is of a team. So it's still too early to say what the Kings' identity is. As much as we may want to claim right now, hey, the Kings being one of the best offenses in the NBA, the Kings having Kevin Huerter shoot 50% from three-point range, De'Aaron Fox playing this way, Domantas Sabonis running everything through him, Malik Monk leading the second or third best bench in the NBA. As much as we want to say that this is their identity, we haven't seen it enough yet. So identity is going to take time, but traits are different. Like one of the biggest traits that I think this Kings team has developed, and to me, to develop a trait, you have to show something more than a handful of times. And this is an indication of who you might be, an indicate part of your identity. And I think a key trait to the Sacramento Kings this season is their ability to close gaps. Now, of course, in the fourth quarter, giving up that big run, they really gave themselves no chance to come back into that game. But they were hurting early. They were down big early in the first quarter, responded with a really, really good second quarter, outscoring the Boston Celtics 40-28 in the second quarter to tie that game back up. And the third quarter was pretty close back and forth too. This is not the first time, second time, third time, fourth time the Sacramento Kings have done this. And I know I've talked about this before on Locked On Kings because Mike Brown, I think, has brought some of this trait from the Golden State Warriors. Now, and I've talked about this, the Warriors are a team that can erase a deficit in a heartbeat, right? They're really, really good at that. And it only takes a couple shots for them. Sometimes it only takes seconds. Kings aren't there yet. Kings, it takes minutes, but they can still close a gap and get back into a game. Years past, Kings go down that big early on, they fold, and this game's a 50-point blowout. Tonight, they responded. In the Charlotte win, they responded. In the loss to the Golden State Warriors, when they were getting 50 dropped on them in the second quarter, they responded and made a game out of that. The Kings have battled back multiple times in games that they've won and games that they've barely lost. I think this is a trait of the Sacramento Kings now, that they keep fighting, they play hard, they don't fold, and they have the capability and the belief in themselves that they can close these gaps. That's significant. That's one trait. Another trait could be they're a high-volume shooting team. I think that's made perfectly clear. This team shoots a lot of threes. That's what they want. Their coaches have told media that clearly. Like, the Kings want to shoot a high volume of threes. They've done that enough over the course of these 18 games to say, okay, that's a trait. Is it enough to call it their identity? We're getting there. Another trait. I think this is more of a team and less of a star-driven team. Now, De'Aaron has gone supernova at times and carried the Kings. He did so like in the Kings win at home over the San Antonio Spurs after Mike Brown challenged him. We saw, of course, the big shot that he hit in Orlando and how he played in overtime in the fourth quarter in Orlando for the Kings to win that game. Like, De'Aaron is certainly shown to be a star and put the team on his back at times. Also, the Kings run the crap through, or run everything through Domantas Sabonis, right? So you could say he's a star in some capacity in that sense too. But during this winning streak, the Sacramento Kings have won by playing really good team basketball, moving the ball, sharing the ball, really good bench production. Like, I think this team, and a trait of this team, maybe not the identity yet, but a trait of this team is when they play as a team, they're at their best. And we've seen it's a pretty consistent theme that when the Kings are winning, 5, 6, sometimes 7 players are in double figure scoring. It's not just De'Aaron Fox. I mean, remember, Terrence Davis had 31 points in the Kings win over the Brooklyn Nets off the bench. De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis also had 31 points combined. And the Kings put up 153 in that game. Team, not stars. And also, let's be real. And I traded this Kings team. They're bad defensively. They're still poor defensively. They've improved, which is not saying much because they were horrendous, historically bad last year. They've definitely gotten better, but they still got a long way to go. That's a trait. What other traits do you see with this Kings team? Also, what are your thoughts on this Kings win? Send them to me. Let me know. And I know you're going to have thoughts on what we're talking about next. We're talking about Keegan Murray. So stay tuned for that after I tell you about a great sponsor here of the Locked On Kings podcast. I'm talking about Turo. Turo is the world's largest car sharing marketplace. Think Airbnb, but for cars. With Turo, you can book any car you want, whenever you want it, from a community of local hosts. You can browse a huge selection of vehicles for just about any occasion on a budget across the US, UK, Canada, and coming soon to you Australians out there. Book a spacious SUV or a minivan for a family road trip. I could have used that on my way down to Disneyland. You can get a classic or luxury car for a special event, a birthday, prom, holiday, something like that. You can also find affordable economy cars if you're on a budget and just trying to get from point A to B. Test drive a new electric vehicle that maybe you've had your eyes on. Hey, I want to test out a Tesla. You can do that by using Turo. There are so many hosts out there that can deliver the right car to you. Every trip is backed by a liability insurance. Terms and conditions and exclusions apply. Forget boring rental cars. Find your drive at Turo.com. Let's talk about Keegan Murray. Yeah, another rough game for the Rook. 3 points, 1 of 8 shooting from the field. Did have 10 rebounds in 23 minutes. So this is another indication of Keegan being smart enough and a good enough overall basketball player to know how he can be impactful despite offensively struggling. But Keegan has really been on the struggle bus. For the majority of the season. Had a couple really, really good games fresh out of the gate. Sprinkled in a couple of good games here and there. But right now, he's struggling. Now, I am not by any means concerned with Keegan not being the right pick at number 4 and with any kind of panic or anything like that. That's not what we're talking about here. I do think it is fair to, whether concerned is the right word, or at least be monitoring the fact that while the Kings have kind of figured things out, while Mike Brown has figured out his rotations, while they've had success, Keegan has struggled. Now, that could be a bunch of different things. That could be Keegan is a rookie and he needs to kind of figure his way. That could also mean that the way the Sacramento Kings are playing and the success that the Kings are playing with right now, Keegan doesn't quite fit in that as well as we thought. Now, I think that's almost doom and gloom, worst case scenario, because I don't think there's any chance of Keegan Murray not being a good NBA player. He's going to have an extremely solid NBA career. But is there a chance that him being an extremely high value role player as a starter, you can still be a role player as a starter, meaning starting, you're spacing the floor, you're out there to help with defense, but you're supposed to hit big shots, which he hasn't been doing as of late. You're supposed to take advantage of the fact when you have guys like Sabonis and De'Aaron Fox who draw so much attention. Like, he struggled with that. That's a role. And if he's not playing that role or living up to that role as well as we think, again, it could just be a slump. We know about the off-court issues with his grandmother that he's been going through right at the beginning of his NBA career. Plus, the NBA game is extremely difficult and is a massive step up from any college, no matter where you're playing at. Like, I expect adjustments. I expect struggles at times from Keegan. And sometimes maybe we need to adjust our expectations a little bit. And maybe we need to stop comparing Keegan Murray to other rookies in the class, because when you look at what Paolo Banchero is doing, I mean, that man's a machine, and he puts up a boatload of points on a Orlando Magic team that doesn't necessarily have the highest of expectations. They're a team I like. I think the Orlando Magic have a very bright future, an exciting future. Like, Keegan Murray's not that kind of player that Paolo Banchero is. Paolo is clearly the best guy. He is the give me the ball, I will score for you. And Keegan can do that in stretches, but I don't think that's who he is as a player. Even if he showed that a little bit at Iowa, that's not who he is as a player in the NBA. And it's certainly not who he is as a player when he's playing next to De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis. So I'm not concerned with Keegan Murray struggling. I think the expectations need to adjust a little bit to he is someone who the Kings believe was a best player available selection at that spot. I still believe he was the best player available selection at that spot, even if Jaden Ivey's playing really well for the Detroit Pistons right now, even if Jaden Ivey is leading him or ahead of him in any Rookie of the Year votes, which there's no point really. It's going to go to either Paolo Banchero or Benedict Mathurin. Like the only way I think it's not going to Paolo is if he gets hurt, knock on wood, because we don't want that to happen. So my expectation for Keegan now is, okay, find your fit. Like, don't be the star rookie. It's great if you can provide 16, 18, 20-point games, and the Kings are going to lean on that sometimes. And I don't think a 16-point per game average is out of the realm of possibility for Keegan Murray by any means. And we've seen he's been able to put up points like that quietly. But don't worry about doing that every single night. Find your fit, be comfortable, and even if your volume of shooting drops a little bit, if you start hitting shots, if you're hitting shots within the flow of the offense, if you're taking advantage of the players that are around you and playing smart basketball, which we know Keegan Murray is a high basketball IQ player, I live with that. I can live with that. And I think those pretty much have been my expectations the entire time and should have been your expectations too, in my opinion. But maybe we got a little too excited by the great start that he got off to. Maybe we got a little too excited by him winning Summer League MVP. And look, we're 18 games into the season. He's had great moments. He's had struggles. Like, if we're talking about waiting for the Kings to have an identity 30 plus games into the season, maybe we wait for Keegan Murray to have maybe a full season or 2 or 3 in the league before we start talking about what his identity is. He has to be better. There's no doubt about it. Keegan Murray absolutely has to be better. He knows it, and I think he will be better. Kings are trying to incorporate him. He's trying to figure things out. Not making excuses for the guys. The Kings have high expectations, and if he's going to be a starter and an important player on a team with with playoff aspirations, maybe championship one day, he needs to play better, or Mike Brown needs to go and find some other option. Also, I want to give some love really quick that has nothing to do with Keegan Murray other than Keegan replaced him in the starting lineup. I thought KZ Okpala played really well in this game from what I watched. I thought KZ Okpala defensively came in, gave the Kings a spark, played really well at times against Tatum. I know KZ Okpala's offensive game is a big struggle. That's why he's gone from a starter to not even in the rotation pretty much. If he can figure out a little bit of an offensive game, I think he's a rotational player on every single NBA roster because of how good his defense is. So I wanted to give him some love, wanted to give him a shout out because defensively, I thought he did a lot of good things that allowed the Kings to get back into this game. But I'm not panicking about Keegan Murray yet. Are you? Let me know at Matt George Sack on Twitter. Email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com. Leave your thoughts in the YouTube comment section down below. This episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by LinkedIn. And these days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. Consider them the best scout that you can get in the workforce. They go out and they find the talent that you're looking for. They weed through all the applications that aren't good fits, save you the time, and ultimately get you the people, I almost said players, well, in their own way, get you the people that are going to do the job most efficiently to help you in your way, shape, or form win a championship for your business. You can add your job in the purple hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. They give you simple tools like screening questions and make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you like to interview and who you want to hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnba to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Like I said in the first segment, the Sacramento Kings need to learn a lesson from this blowout loss. Make this blowout loss a necessary evil. How do you respond? Because you're going to need to respond. You're coming home, you have a day off, and then you got the Phoenix Suns. Following the Phoenix Suns, you have the Indiana Pacers, who are playing really well right now. By the way, I think the Phoenix Suns are at the top of the Western Conference. Indiana Pacers playing extremely well. Of course, we know the undertones of that game. Tyrese Halliburton's return, blah, 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 blah. The LA Clippers, you've already lost to them. The Chicago Bulls, they, I think, recently beat the Boston Celtics. You have that game at home. Then you have the Milwaukee Bucks and the Cleveland Cavaliers on the road to wrap up that 6-game stretch. And then after that, I think you have like the New York Knicks and the Philadelphia 76ers and the Toronto Raptors. Like, hello, welcome to the NBA. Like, as great as it is that you're on a win streak, or you were on a win streak, find a way to sprinkle in another 3 or 4 game win streak in that group if you can. That would be phenomenal. Or find a way to get through this stretch, 500 in the stretch, and still 2 games or so above 500 like you are right now. That shows real growth with this Kings team. But in order to do that, they have to learn lessons and make clear adjustments from the struggles that they had in this game tonight. I think they'll do it. I think they will. I'm excited to see how they respond in this stretch. Kings and Suns are always a good game. I think the Kings match up against the Suns actually really, really well. Very anxious to see that. Coming up on a future episode of Locked On Kings, I have Franklin Cardicelli from Sacktown Sports 1140 Radio. He covers the Sacramento Kings for them. He's also one of the excellent hosts of the Return of the Roar podcast. He'll join me. We'll talk a little bit of Kings. He'll join me on, I think, Sunday's episode of Locked On Kings. I do still want to spend a podcast talking a little bit about trading Harrison Barnes, because while I was away, James Ham put out, I think, an article or some kind of report that the Kings aren't interested in trading Barnes right now, aren't necessarily focused on trading Harrison Barnes. They're focused on winning. And I think that's the absolute right approach. So I will dive into that and talk about that more at some point in the near future here on Locked On Kings. But I appreciate your support. Again, I hope you had a phenomenal Thanksgiving. Thank you for coming back. I'm glad Locked On Kings is back. And hopefully we won't have any more lulls or struggles or gaps in programming like that for the remainder of this season and hopefully in the postseason. Appreciate you so much. Can't wait to have you join me on the next episode of Locked On Kings. Until then, my name is Matt George. You've been listening to the Locked On Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.